I'm Amy Booth, Managing Editor of the Buenos Aires Herald, and we heard earlier today from Ambassador Mark Stanley of the US, had some very interesting things to say about Argentine relationships with the US, the situation with the Argentine economy, critical minerals, and of course travel in the United States. Pleasure to hear from him earlier. We're now joined by Ambassador Kirsty Hayes, the Ambassador of the UK to Argentina, which is of course a really fantastic opportunity to speak to you. The Buenos Aires Herald is it's a publication with roots in the British community in Argentina, so you know this is extremely special to us. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Hayes.
It's a huge pleasure to be here. Hard act to follow Mark, though.
So to get the ball rolling, I wanted to ask, I understand that you were a paleontologist in a previous life.
Almost. I was an archaeologist.
You were an archaeologist.
So I studied Latin American archaeology at university, and I did some archaeological field work in Peru and also in Belize in Central America. And I actually joined the Foreign Office wanting to work in Latin America. This was about 25 years ago, but this is the first time I've managed to get a posting in the region. So very special for me.
That's incredible. And I wanted to ask, since Argentina has done some incredible paleontology and archaeology work, do you have a favorite or a most interesting site in Argentina?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed visiting Xincal in Catamarca, which also is very close to Londres, Catamarca, which was
Londres, Catamarca.
Londres, Catamarca. So it was great to visit there with the governor. I think the last time that a British ambassador had visited Londres, the Argentine Londres, was in the 1970s. So it was great to re-establish that link. But yeah, Xincal, I think possibly less known as one of the great Inca capitals. People are internationally probably more familiar with the sites in Peru, but it was wonderful to go there. It's been it's very well presented as well for tourists, so I recommend it if you haven't been. But the paleontology is obviously fantastic as well. I've been in Chubut over the weekend, obviously a real hotspot for paleontology. And I also, I'm not going to say it right, I was in San Juan and I went to the Valley of the Moon, or Igualasco, is that right?
Igualasco, yeah.
Yes, which was amazing too.
So, Ambassador, to talk about a little bit about the current economic and energy scene, Argentina is known for its natural resources, which it has plenty of, including minerals that are critical for the energy transition, which is on the agenda of every government in the world, including lithium among those critical minerals. There are many British mining companies, of course. It is a sector where we can hope to see or expect to see growing cooperation between the countries. Absolutely.
I mean, you're so right that critical minerals are going to be fundamental for the world's green transition, and Argentina is extremely well placed in that. Lithium has been a big focus. I think copper is also very relevant. You know, I think copper has a lot of underexploited resources here in Argentina when you compare with Chile. We already have a lot of interest from British companies. We obviously have Rio Tinto with their significant presence in Salta province. And I think it's really important that we look not just at the opportunities that lithium brings economically for Argentina, but we also think about social license. So the companies we work with are all really clear that the bad old days are very water intensive and visually damaging, you know, the sort of impact visually of the old-fashioned open salars is something we should move beyond. And Rio Tinto, for example, are working with very new technology which uses minimal water. And I think that's very important. Also very important that these projects bring jobs and growth to the local economies and provide local sources of employment. So that's something we've been putting a lot of emphasis on. But so far our companies have been really delighted with the welcome they've received in Argentina, both at national level and at provincial level. And in fact, we have 5 governors shortly visiting to the UK, along with the Secretary of Mining for London Metals Week. So it's definitely an area we want to grow on.
So you mentioned this cooperation between British companies and Argentine provinces. Argentina brought a new government, has a new government in office since December. What are you hearing about from businesses and from the government side of what they are expecting, and how are they feeling up to now from this new administration?
Yeah, it's a big question. Obviously, President Milei has come in with a very radical reform plan, both for bringing Argentina's economy back on track, but also for promoting private investment and making this a more business-friendly environment. We already had a lot of British investment and interest, over 100 British subsidiaries, for example, in the country. But I think British companies are watching with a lot of interest the economic programme so far. I think there have been some really encouraging macroeconomic figures, and we're seeing Argentina's persistent problem of very high inflation beginning to level off. And so we've had a lot of calls from potential UK investors who are very interested. That said, I think people are taking a little bit of a wait and see approach and seeing how long this economic change will take to bed in.
I think that's a really interesting point, because we've seen some really interesting initiatives in terms of business. Like we've seen the new large investment regime, the RIGI, and I think there's a lot of conversation going on at the moment with international companies who are maybe looking at dipping a toe in the water, and they're asking, first of all, is this enough? They're watching the provinces adhere to it or not, and also they're talking about whether currency controls are still a deal breaker in the context of the RIGI. I wanted to ask a little bit about what you think about that for British companies.
Yeah, I think the issue of currency controls is really a critical one. You mentioned dipping a toe in Argentina, and I think one of the challenges has been it's not an easy market in which to dip a toe, exactly because of the currency controls, and also because there has been a bit of a history of reversals of economic policies or commercial policies, which make it a little hard for businesses to plan. So in fact, the companies the British companies who've had most success here are not really the ones who've dipped in a toe. They're the ones that have dived in wholeheartedly, and they're in it for the long term and able to weather sort of ups and downs economically or policy-wise. But I think if and when the government feels in a position to lift those currency controls, and it's something that has to be done in a very mindful way and not hurried, but when that happens, I think that will be incredibly significant, not just for British investors, but for investment more broadly.
So the British Embassy is very active in the, shall we say, cultural relations and diplomatic relations between communities. Of course, the British community has long-standing in Argentina. Herald is part of that. But I was wondering, what is the current state of Anglo-Argentine cultural relations, considering that the Anglo community in Argentina is mostly made up of sons and grandchildren and children of the original British immigrants. I was wondering how those relations stand today.
I think they're still really strong. As a Scot, I do use Anglo-Argentine, but of course it's not just the English community, it's right. Also the Scottish community and indeed the Welsh community. I said I was down in Chubut over the weekend, and it is extraordinary to see the Welsh cultural influences, both in places like Trelew and Gaiman, but also further west in Trevelyan, where Welsh is widely spoken. I had sort of several Welsh teas that were very much as if I was really in Wales. I went to an Eisteddfod, which is a Welsh poetry festival. So it's really, really thriving. Equally, we have a lot of, as you say, mostly descendants of British immigrants, but who keep those cultures really alive. I'm always staggered by the number of bagpipe players there are in Argentina, for example. And there's excellent work in terms of preserving the story of the British culture. Just to give one example, the excellent work done by the British Cemetery. And I ought to mention that next year we'll actually be celebrating the bicentenary of our relationship. So it'll be a great opportunity to shine a light on, the role that the British community has played in Argentina, and obviously, as you say, the Herald very much a part of that.
Thank you, that's so interesting. And I think that brings me nicely on to the next question, which is that obviously in the UK we've just had a change of government, and our Foreign Secretary is now David Lammy. Now he's the son of Guyanese immigrants, so I wanted to ask whether you think that, having a Foreign Secretary who's the son of South Americans could lead to a greater focus from the part of the UK government on Anglo or British Argentine relations.
Yeah, I think obviously the Foreign Secretary brings a really rich cultural heritage to the role, and he has shown himself in his early weeks. I mean, he's shown himself interested in a lot of things. You've probably seen he's travelled very extensively, but he has shown a lot of interest in Latin America, and I know he has made, even before the election, he had made several visits out to the region. So yes, we're really optimistic about the position this government's going to take towards the region.
And could you go into any more detail on what sorts of sectors and issues that might take the form of?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think trade is going to be front and centre of a lot of our work going forward. Trade and economic growth more broadly. The UK has always wanted a strong and stable Argentina, and we're great believers in the potential that the country has. We've already mentioned critical minerals, but also, it's an extraordinary agricultural producer. Maybe we can't go back to Argentina's golden age where we had this phenomenally vibrant trade relationship, but we can try and make some moves in that direction. So even in the challenging last few years, Argentine wine exports, Malbec in particular, have rocketed in the UK, and you can't go into any restaurant in the UK now without seeing at least one Malbec on the restaurant menu, and often a choice. So there's plenty of potential to increase that trade. I think we've mentioned the cultural links and educational links. So we have a program of scholarships, and we're looking to expand that program with Argentina to celebrate these special people-to-people links that we have. So it's going to be multifaceted, I think.
Yeah, I think we were interested to know more. So I understand that you're referring to the Chevening scholarships there, because we've had some very important Argentine political figures such as Martín Lustó, Jorge Capitanich, as well as a number of presidents around the world who participated in that program. So I mean, it's great to hear that that's something that you're looking to develop. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the things that's been very heartwarming as British Ambassador here, that as I travel around the country or go to various meetings, I'm always meeting Chevening alumni, not just in politics and from, every political party, every part of the political spectrum, but people in business, in civil society, in journalism, in science. So it's a very important programme for us. And when our former Foreign Minister David Cameron met with the Canciller Diana Mondino earlier in the year, she mentioned the importance of the Chevening scholarships, and as a result of that, we've increased the number against a backdrop where globally we're reducing the number of scholarships that we offer.
So we talked about earlier about minerals, essential minerals, and the cooperation between the 5 provinces and the British mining sector. Is there any concern regarding the current government's anti-2030 agenda that is very big on environmental change, and kind of the reluctance of the government to, or its message that has been against that kind of those kind of topics?
So the first thing I would say is that this, the 2030 agenda, and particularly environmental protection and the fight against climate change, is a top priority for our government. So if you haven't seen it, I would really recommend taking a look at the Foreign Secretary's keynote speech yesterday on climate change, where he set out very clearly what the scale of the challenge as we see it, and the very bold programme of action that the UK is taking, both domestically but also in terms of how we support less developed countries to address these challenges. I think the President has made clear that for him this is not a priority, and that on a personal level I think he has some doubts about the causes of climate change. But I think it's really important with all this sort of news whir around this issue, that the government has committed to fulfilling the obligations accepted by the previous government in terms of its programme to reduce national emissions, and it's not just the critical minerals that Argentina has to offer here. The country has boundless potential for green energy production. So wind energy, obviously. At the moment, the UK is the world leader in offshore wind production. But I have to say, if Argentina put its mind to it, I'm sure it could beat us very quickly, because you have a lot of wind in parts of the country. And there's also other provinces that have a lot of potential for solar production. So I think there's a really important and significant role that Argentina could play on this agenda.
Thank you so much. Did you have any other questions, Juan?
I was just curious of hearing a little bit more about those 5 provinces, because I understand that's something that hasn't been released yet. I had never heard about it, and I was just interested in hearing if you could offer any more details about that cooperation.
Yeah, sure. So this week in London at the end of the month, it's the sort of probably the most globally important convocation of people with an interest in metals and mining. And we are expecting the governors of, I better get this right, Salta, Jujuy, Catamarca, San Juan and Mendoza. I hope that's correct. I think it is. As well as the Secretary of Mining and a broader delegation as well. And the idea is exactly to explore how Argentina can make the most of these fantastic natural resources that it has. As far as we're aware, it's the largest grouping of governors to visit the UK, so we're quite excited about it.
That's fantastic. Well, we're excited to hear more about that and more details about that as and when it emerges. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ambassador Hayes. It's been fantastic speaking to you. You know, the Buenos Aires Herald is a newspaper that was founded by British immigrants. It has roots in the British community in Argentina. So it's been really fantastic and really special being able to speak to you today. So thank you.
It's been a real pleasure, and I hope you'll play an active part in our bicentenary celebrations next year.
I hope so too. Yes.
I'd be honored.
Great.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you.
This has been Herald Talks, the Diplomats edition here in the Hilton Buenos Aires. I'm Amy Booth, Managing Editor of the Herald, and this has been Juan Decima, Editor of the Buenos Aires Herald also. I'd like to thank the whole team of the Buenos Aires Herald who've been here supporting this event, especially our Editor-in-Chief Estefania Pozo, who's been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event happen. I'd also really like to thank Ámbito Debate and Ricardo Daloya, who's also done an enormous amount to produce this event. Thanks, of course, to the Hilton, and most of all, thank you to our audience who's watching us, whether you're watching us live or whether you're tuning in later. If you found this interesting, don't hesitate to tweet your thoughts on #DiplomatsEdition. I hope this is going to be the first of many events. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you.